Welcome to ZekeTalk, everyone. My name is Jim Tudor, and this week I am here with special guest Kevin Wilcox. Kevin, how are you?
All right. How are you?
I'm hanging in there. I'm doing okay. I'm here in St. Louis, where it gets incredibly humid, and the humidity is I don't know. It's all calming down a little bit. We had a heat wave recently, and that really took it out of us, but it's getting better now. Temperatures in the 80s tonight.
Yeah,
So that's our weather.
I'm here in Brooklyn. It's 78 outside. It's almost certainly a good bit warmer than that in here.
Well, I'm sorry to hear that. I hope you're near a window or a fan.
I am. I don't want to really open up the window right now because a lot of noise from outside.
Okay, it's Brooklyn.
Exactly.
How do you like living in Brooklyn?
I've I've lived here about 11 years now. I've you know I really enjoy it.
Okay. Just so the viewers and listeners know, this is the first time you and I have really had, I think you popped into our other show, The Wonder Show, a little bit. Is that correct?
I guest starred in it once.
Okay, right. So yeah, other than that, we really haven't crossed paths, you and I. You come to us through Mike Anderson, the
Right.
often co-host of this show.
Right. He and I met here in New York through Doctor Who fandom, and I've done a few projects with him.
Very good. So Mike can't be here tonight; he's on assignment,
Hmm.
and but we'll have him back shortly. Maybe next week, maybe. You know, um, he has to pay the price for skipping out on this episode. That's the policy. So anyhow, we were talking shortly before the show that both Kevin and I had seen the film Valerian and the City of a Thousand Planets, the new science fiction opus by French film director Luc Besson. My review for that is at our website, ZekeFilm.org. And so you can certainly go find it there. At this point, it's probably off the main page, and you have to search for it because we have a constant flurry of new content going up on that site at ZekeFilm.org. And there ought to be links for that here on your YouTube picture. But anyhow, so my take on it is out there. I don't know if you got a chance to see that at all, Kevin, but let me just ask me, what are your thoughts on this film?
I attended a press screening for it shortly before it came out, and I was glad I had not paid money for it.
I see. So it sounds like you and I are probably of like minds about this. Going into the press screening, which I also attended, we get handed a pair of 3D glasses.
Mm-hmm.
Right away, it's obvious that the 3D is outstanding, I think. And I'm not somebody who values 3D very highly. Most of the time, it's just an intrusion to the overall experience. As someone who goes to a lot of press screenings, it's not so often the case anymore, but for a while, it really was the standard that if a film is offered as an option in 3D to general audiences, then it's going to be shown in 3D to the press. So I would see films in 3D all the time if they were, so it got a little annoying that, certain like Marvel movies, for the most part, until recently, there's been no reason for those to be in 3D, like The Avengers. Great movie, but why did I watch that in 3D?
Mm-hmm.
This one really popped in 3D. That's one of the few positive things I'll say about it. What did you think of that?
I think you could tell just from, the trailers that this was a movie that was really going to take advantage of the third dimension. And, he was putting up a lot of spectacle, which I don't think it was always well used, but it was, very nice to look at.
Yeah, I definitely agree. For those who don't know, this is a film that's based on a long-running French comic series called Valerian and what's the girl's name? It's her name, Laureline. Yeah, Valerian and Laureline, and it's really intricately drawn. This fantastic visual comic book, which hearing why Luc Besson wanted to make Valerian into a feature film is because he grew up enamored with these visuals and subsequently with the characters. And this thing ran, by the way, from the 1960s all the way to 2010. This is a long-running comic series. And he was very enamored with it. And eventually it did influence his film The Fifth Element, the 1997 science fiction starring Bruce Willis. Did you care for that?
Oh, I'm a big fan of The Fifth Element. And I think, you can draw a lot of comparisons to what The Fifth Element did well that this film just didn't.
Interesting. I'd love to hear more about that because back then, I came out of The Fifth Element very disappointed. The trailer for it blew me away. I couldn't wait to see it. And then I saw it and it's just like, oh man, this is really cornball in a bad way. Tell me why you feel that this Valerian failed where Fifth Element succeeded.
I think there are a couple of key issues with this. First of all, the biggest problem with this movie is the leads. The two leads, Valerian and Laureline.
Absolutely.
And you can't put it all on the acting. They're just not well written. All of the character stuff through the movie just feels so unearned. And one thing I mentioned to a few people is how we're introduced really to her character, her backstory is he tells her backstory and then she repeats it back to him. And that's the level of characterization. And they're just not interesting characters as presented in this movie. And of course, at the center of the other movie, you had Bruce Willis. So you had, his persona, which, is there and it's well defined. You have humor, which you don't have nearly as much here. What you do have doesn't work.
Right.
At the screening I went to, the biggest laughs were for the serious character moments.
Ooh.
Yeah.
Yow. Unintentional laughs, huh?
Yeah. And the other thing is, The Fifth Element, you have this original world building. Here, he's following the comic, and you can tell he's really following a multi-issue comic story. Because you have an episodic nature to this movie, even more than you did in The Fifth Element. For example, and I'm going to try to say this without spoiling anything, the whole section with Rihanna is the movie's going along. It hits a point where the storyline just suddenly goes off on this tangent. It follows that, and then it ends, and back to the main story. There really isn't anything from that section that had been built before or that follows after. And there are a couple other sequences like that through the movie. And, you could tell that if it had been built as a movie or if he had done more to rework it, you could have had more flow, which would definitely have helped this film.
Oh, well, I absolutely agree. Back then I gave The Fifth Element 2 chances. I went and saw it twice. It didn't. I didn't warm up to it either time, so I haven't tried again since. That was 20 years ago. So granted, who knows how I'd feel about it today. That said, I'm not in a hurry to go do that. because Valerian, I keep hoping that Luc Besson will live up to the promise of Luc Besson. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
He lets me down more often than not. And this one was a particularly bad letdown. Again, for people that may not know, and this film's been out for several weeks now, and I think it's probably disappearing from screens in the United States at this point.
Yeah.
It's not has not been well received, and with good reason. I think you and I would agree.
Mm-hmm.
It's a futuristic tale. It's the 25th century, I think. It's they're out in space. It's these two human characters, this young man Valerian and the girl Laureline, and they are some sort of space police. And they've got their high technology. There's a pretty cool idea of a sequence, and I suppose it's as well executed as one would hope. Towards the beginning, where Valerian has to apprehend an object, if I'm remembering correctly,
Yeah.
it's a trans-dimensional heist that he has to pull off.
Right.
And that was pretty cool as an idea.
Yeah. Well, that sequence I did really enjoy. Mostly, it was, I mean, some of the elements that you have throughout the movie that are problems are still there, because you get the interaction between the main characters and essentially their accomplices in the heist. And it's another one of those things where they're telling rather than showing.
Yeah.
But once you get into the action sequence, that's pretty fun. It's definitely very visual. And, then, that issue basically ends and we start to get the main story.
Right. Which was a lot less compelling than the little bit that we just saw. Which of course, from a screenwriterly point of view, is really only there to show the way that Valerian and Laureline work together,
right,
as a team. So we get the gist of that in this cool trans-dimensional, sequence, and then alongside of that, we have their romantic subplot, if we want to call it that. That's pathetic.
Oh, no, it's, again, I mean, it's pretty much something that happens with a lot of this movie. It's, they tell us rather than show us that he's something of a ladies' man, which you don't believe.
No.
And then he's like, oh no, I'm going to prove to you that I can commit. And he proposes to her.
Yeah.
In a way that sounds like it's supposed to be a joke, except it isn't.
Right.
And so, again, that whole thing where, it's never earned. There's not much of an arc to it.
Yeah.
He proposes. He's like, no, I'm serious. Half an hour later, no, I'm serious about it.
Yeah.
Half an hour later, no, I'm serious about it.
And this actress, she was in Suicide Squad, and I don't know about much else. She's yet to prove herself. I can't remember her name. It's Kara something or other, and I believe she's British. She rolls her eyes through this entire film.
Yeah.
Like she's embarrassed to be in it. I don't know if that was truly the case, but, it certainly is. This, to call it one note seems too generous. It's so flatline, and the same with him. It's this really bland, kind of smirky dude kind of thing, and there's no magnetism between the two of them. There's no magnetism for us in the audience as to why to watch them for 2.5 hours, and I never believed that these two should be together. I'm not rooting for them to get together. I'm not rooting for her to accept his proposal. I do not care. It's like a James Bond movie where we're told this guy is this James Bond type Lothario who now, at the very beginning, is hanging it up.
Mm-hmm.
What's the fun in that? It's, he's got to prove himself to her. I mean, quite frankly, this seems like a character development that would have had a lot more weight in a second film.
Yeah. And I think this was like originally like the second or third storyline with these characters, where some of that would make sense. Of course, then again, from what I understand, in the original comic, she had been like a French peasant, and he had traveled back in time to her, but they took all of the time travel from the comic out of this, and they gave her a very standard background. Because like I said, when he spits it at her and then she spits it back at him, they talk about how she was like Ivy League. Yeah, I don't know if you believe that at all from
No.
her performance.
They just say she is.
Right.
So she is. Now this is, and then you mentioned Rihanna. There is a point in the film where Valerian loses Laureline, and he has to run around through this alien red light district to get her back. Now, amid the entire film, they're in this, I kind of called it this giant floating space mecha turd kind of thing, this mega space station. It's not very attractive looking on screen. It is the city of 1,000 planets, so there are 1,000 different kinds of aliens running around. One alien is the shape-shifting squid voiced by Rihanna, who's embodied by Rihanna briefly. So that's one of the shapes. And Ethan Hawke is her pimp.
Right.
Which I was a little disheartened that Ethan Hawke was turning up here, because I had just seen him really expand his own acting horizons in a much better, smaller film called Maudie, which is an artist biopic of a folk artist named Maud Lewis. And he plays her husband, and he does a fantastic job in a role that is unlike anything I'd ever seen him do. Now here, this is also unlike anything I'd ever seen him do, but in a bad way. It's he's hamming it up and being silly. It's really inconsequential, though, where Rihanna is the focus of this sequence.
Right. It's sort of like, for those who remember The Fifth Element, the opera scene with Plava Laguna, the way that, at least for Bruce Willis's character, you kind of get this pause in the story while you see this. Except in that movie, it was cutting back and forth between that and a fight scene. In this, it's cutting back and forth between her performance and Ethan Hawke at the piano.
Nope. No, thank you, huh?
Yeah. I mean, it just stops the film.
Right. Now, let's go ahead and go into spoiler territory.
Okay.
The end of the film, the entire way through, we don't know exactly, we're not supposed to know who the villain is. Who blew up the peace-loving alien planet at the very beginning? What jerk did that?
I am going to give the film more credit in that I don't think it was necessarily intended to be so mysterious, because, I mean, let's be fair. The moment he comes on screen, he's the villain.
You're talking about the Clive Owen character.
Yeah. I mean, he's, it's one of these things where it's not like the twist in Wonder Woman. I mean, this is very much not a twist at all that he's the villain. I mean, it's telegraphed, and like I said, I want to give them credit for that being intentional.
Okay. Well, that's fair. Because it is so, standard issue villain reveal of most any movie. It's like, oh gosh, it's a conspiracy that goes all the way to the top of our own organization. White guy in a suit is the villain. In this case, covered with medals because it's the future.
Right. And that huge chest piece.
Oh, yes, that was ridiculous. Yes, he wears a huge gold chest piece. Kind of a Power Rangers upper, shoulder pad thing, I guess, maybe painted gold. Yeah, it's, it's Clive Owen who, there was his time in the sun about 10 years ago was an interesting thing. He never quite took off as this A-list star that they kept trying to package him as. But I always kind of liked the guy. So to see him kind of, goofing off here, I hope he made some money. I don't know. Children of Men is just so good. And, so anyhow, here he is, the man who would have been James Bond, playing one of these cookie cutter villains. Even, credit where credit is due. It's still, I think, a cookie cutter villain. And, we sat through all of that to see this, internal fix get revealed. Yeah. So anyhow, big effects picture. It sounds like you might have some familiarity with the source material.
Not a lot. I did some little bit of research before the movie came out.
Oh, okay. Now, were you looking forward to this movie? Were you anticipating it throughout the year?
Not throughout the year, but I was somewhat, just because I am a fan of The Fifth Element. And, I wanted to see, a return to that.
Makes sense. Makes sense. That's a good reason. How do you feel about Luc Besson's previous film, Lucy, the Scarlett Johansson expanded intelligence film? That's got a science fiction root structure.
Never saw it. Never really got past the whole, humans only use 10%
of their brain.
Trope. Yeah.
Yeah.
Same reason I never saw Limitless.
Right. Yeah. The review on the ZekeFilm site, that writer also had a problem with the 10% brain thing, because apparently it's false. But that movie, the entire Lucy movie, is hung on it.
Yeah. I mean, it's like complete nonsense.
Yeah. Well, Limitless, I saw Limitless. It's nonsense too. Yeah. But it's nonsense that Limitless, both films spiral off into nonsense.
Yeah.
Limitless spirals off into unfortunate car chase crime movie nonsense. So it actually gets worse. Lucy really goes off the deep end with, like, I mean, it almost turns into like some kind of weird Ken Russell film or something. It really gets out there in the deep end of oddity, and it's one of these movies that I think is acting a lot. It thinks it's a lot smarter than it is. The movie Lucy. I mean, the fact that it's about intelligence and what happens when the human mind, reaches its supposed full potential is, of course, if such a thing were to happen, we'd all be embarrassed to look at the movie Lucy, I'm sure. It's, I don't know. I don't hate that film. It's just kind of a goofy, weird misfire. And now he's talking about making a second one of those. And I don't know how they do it. Because everything happened in Lucy. Maybe another person gets subjected to this. Who knows?
Linus.
Ah, yeah, there we go. There we go. It's the Peanuts universe. It's the connection we never saw coming. Well, let's see. What other... While we're talking about this filmmaker, what are the films of his, other than The Fifth Element, that you like? Can you think of any? Did you care for Leon, The Professional, or La Femme Nikita back in the day?
I've only ever seen the end of The Professional. It was came out when I was, much younger. Well, everybody was.
Me too.
And I just remember walking in at the end and wondering why you have dozens upon dozens of these New York cops hanging on every word of this guy who was clearly wasted. And, that is another one of those things that just, I have trouble with in a movie. Just bringing in dozens of cops to be, generic bad guys. And so I just never went back and watched the movie as a whole.
Okay, fair enough. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. That didn't occur to me, but I did watch the whole film beginning to end.
Yeah.
I haven't seen it in 20 years. But back then, I liked it a lot. And thinking about it now, how it's, Natalie Portman as a 10-year-old or whatever, really holding her own in that movie to Jean Reno, the assassin of the title of the movie. And he, of course, was on his acting hot streak in movies at the time.
Right.
He could do no wrong. Natalie Portman hits the scene as this kid. And one thing about The Professional that kind of closed it off to a lot of people, but did make it an interesting movie, was the bizarre relationship between the two of them. And, this little girl and this grown man assassin, and no, of course there's no physical interplay there. He cares for her, but is it fatherly? I get the impression that it was. She cares for him, but is it daughterly? I'm not sure. Okay. Right. There's this just really odd tension in that relationship. It's the kind of thing that a movie like Valerian, I'm not saying I wanted to see inappropriate relationships in Valerian or anything like that, but a little bit of teeth, a little bit of curveball, a little bit of something would have been nice. It's an edge that I think has really been sanded off. It's lost in what Luc Besson does, and maybe it's because he spent so much money making this film that he wanted to make it as across the board bland / accessible as possible.
Yeah.
But
well, he definitely achieved one of those.
I agree. So, my son's walking past here. Anyhow, yeah, the one final thought about Valerian, and I guess we can wrap this up because I don't have a whole lot else to say about that movie. It got off to what I thought was a terrific start. Space Oddity by David Bowie, and this montage showing the development of, human relations in outer space, beginning back in the 1960s with early space stations and astronauts, and then developing further and further and further and further out. And it's just this montage of humans greeting different aliens that just get stranger and stranger, and the song is playing, and it's a fantastic song. Did you like that?
The opening sequence, really worked. I did notice that, in the opening credits they said Rutger Hauer, and he appears at the end of that sequence, gives a little speech, cut to 400 years later, and so we never see him again. And
He's
so it was
dead.
Yeah. So it was interesting that he actually got listed in the opening credits for what's about 20 seconds of speech.
Interesting. Now, I reviewed a completely forgotten science fiction film from the 1980s for the ZekeFilm site called Star Slammer, which just came out on Blu-ray. And it is a really, really, really bottom of the barrel, low budget, sci-fi cheesecakey kind of movie. That movie in the credits, John Carradine, the legendary actor from the 1930s and 40s, apparently must have been in some real financial dire straits in his elderly years, because he turns up here as a justice, a hologram who appears to sentence our heroine, our lead, to the Star Slammer, the space prison that she spends the rest of the movie in. It's this women in prison movie in space. And he's a hologram reading off a cue card. You actually see his eyes. I sentence you to 30 years in the Star Penitentiary. And then he fades out and he's gone. So there could be a club, for these types of for cameos that get big screen credit in these things. Rutger Hauer, John Carradine. Another one in there, though, is not quite as brief. And I forgot Rutger Hauer's in Valerian. Herbie Hancock. Yeah. The musician. He's also, he shows up as a hologram giving Valerian his mission.
Yeah. Shows up a couple times as a face on a screen.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's, what do you think? An hour and 20 minutes of work tops? I mean, he could have recorded that on his tour bus with the webcam.
Yeah, I mean, it's, those parts are nice if you can get them.
I suppose. So yeah, it's a little something for Herbie Hancock fans. But it's Rihanna who really gets the performance, the musical performance. She does a Bob Fosse number, I guess, in the middle of the movie. Little spice, I guess. I don't know. So I don't know. One thing I don't know, Kevin, is how Valerian is being received overseas. I don't know if we've got another Warcraft on our hands where the film drops in the U.S. It also drops overseas, of course. It does very, 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 very well in China, and it sinks like a stone here. I wonder if Valerian will be another case like that.
I don't necessarily think it'll, play that well, in China. I mean, there might be some markets where it does really well. Now, Warcraft, I had also seen at a press screening. Big screen, 3D.
Me too.
That one I liked better than this.
Agreed. I didn't love it, but it's better than this.
Yeah.
Yeah. As far as this sort of thing goes, I guess. Yeah. No, Warcraft was unfortunate because you could tell. I mean, and this too. I mean, all the work that goes into these things. The visuals of Valerian are not poor.
No, no, the visuals are great. There's just, it's, the center that's kind of a black hole. The two main characters. Yeah. And, some of the visuals, are well used, some not so much. As I've said a few times, they tell us much more of the story, than they really should. It's too episodic. I guess one thing with regard to using the visuals is when they first get to the station, they get to Alpha, you have an info dump of what the station is. And you have, here are a few examples of some of the settings that we have here. And you get a few of these disparate environments. The closest those get to actually being in the story is, and this was a scene that they had released ahead of time, it was in trailers, where he's like running, smash through a wall into another environment, smash through a wall into another environment. And so he passes through a couple of those. And that is and so we get this info dump introducing them, and then they're in the sequence when he runs through, and that is as close as they get to the story. So it's like they look nice, but there was no apparent point to them for what we were given. And I wonder if in the original comic that had been just him running Crash and it was meant to be somewhat more metaphorical, and he just translated it literally.
Yeah.
Because, it's also one of those things where even as you're watching, it's like, wait, this doesn't make sense for those to actually physically be next to each other.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I don't even know, and by that point, I certainly didn't care.
Yeah.
And I never saw the trailer. But of course, a lot of people are going to gravitate to this on, when it arrives on 4K technology and Blu-ray. It'll probably be streaming here because, again, that seems to be the fate of films that don't play well in theaters. They're on streaming services sooner than later.
Mm-hmm.
To those people, I would say, I know Valerian has a handful of fans. It has its apologists. Those people, I've yet to hear a lot of the reasoning. I know, like Max Foisey, who contributes occasionally to ZekeFilm on the site, he really enjoyed the movie.
Mm-hmm.
We saw it in the same theater. Afterwards, he was one of the few that was really happy with it. And I think for him, it resonates because he enjoys the roots of these things.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, he enjoys more other things than that. But, there's other people, too, that have said, like, this is a French comic book that, is one of the many elements in inspiring, say, Star Wars and everything that's Star Wars inspired. So, really, we've got Valerian to thank. So to trash the movie somehow feels like, an undervaluing of the source material. Same with John Carter a few years ago.
I would say, we've all seen bad adaptations of some of these classics. And so I think you can recognize a bad adaptation as a bad adaptation without your recognition sullying the original. I mean, Sylvester Stallone as Judge Dredd, for example.
No. Yeah. That we try to forget that one. There's another Judge Dredd film that's much better, by the way.
Yeah, the Carl Urban one.
Yeah. Just so people know what we're talking about. So anyhow, people are going to find Valerian. I think, just know, folks, that, it's a whole lot of eye candy, and I can't recommend it on those grounds. Here in 2017, there are a lot of other movies that qualify as terrific eye candy that give you more than Valerian and the City of a Thousand Planets. So that's I think that's pretty much all I have to say about it. Do you have any closing thoughts, Kevin?
No, I think I've given everything. So.
Okay.
Wait, I'll say this. Yes,
okay.
It looks nice, so it would make a great screensaver.
A 2.5-hour screensaver. Yeah.
Oh no, you have to cut out a lot of the bits. Probably get it down to maybe 1.5-hour screensaver.
Okay.
I don't know. No sound.
Who'd go to the trouble? Yeah. No sound. No sound. Yeah. Will Valerian marry Laureline? Will she accept his proposal? Will she? They keep having to remind us.
That's all of what you're cutting out. That's all.
Yeah. That's gone. That's what's gone. Yeah. That's the hour, by the way. That would do it.
Yeah.
Well, all right, sir. Well, again, this has been ZekeTalk. My name is Jim, and with me was Kevin Wilcox from Brooklyn. And thanks for joining us tonight, Kevin.
Yeah. Thank you for having me.
Well, you bet. We'll be back next week, and subsequently, I believe that's our plan, um, with more film and television talk. ZekeTalk comes to you courtesy of ZekeFilm.org, our website, where you can go find all the latest film reviews and other crazy and fantastic content that we offer. Terrific writing, by the way. We brought in a new writer who's debuted today, named Madeline Brophy, whose piece on the Amazon Prime series Fleabag has been posted at our site. So you can read about Fleabag Season 1, highly recommended series from Madeline. And I just posted this afternoon my compare-contrast piece on the aforementioned film Maudie, the artist biopic, and David Lowery's A Ghost Story. I compare the two films in the same piece. So you're not going to get that anywhere else. Again, that's ZekeFilm.org, and there's plenty more there. Kevin, anything you're working on? Any websites, or do you have a blog or anything to plug? Feel free.
Not at the moment. I'm mostly, here in New York City doing, sketch and improv comedy. I appear on podcasts usually as a member of the audience.
Aha, you appear as a member of the audience.
Yeah.
So glad to have you on the other side this time, sir. And thanks for getting dressed up, by the way. I feel like I kind of, came to the party in my Rocky t-shirt, and you're ready for, the nicest St. Patrick's Day party that Brooklyn has to offer.
Well, as Michael can tell you, I'm in shirt and tie. Pretty much that would be beachwear for me. So this is as dressed down as I get. I
had no idea. Well, it's been a pleasure talking to you. I hope your next movie is a better one than Valerian and the City of 1,000 Planets. And we will catch up with everyone later. Subscribe to our ZekeFilm channel and listen to our past episodes there. Thanks, everyone. And good night, Kevin.
Night.